Welcome to another edition of your Month in Review, where we do it live. I am joined by our amazing news team. I've got our research director, Jen Wood. I've got our special projects director, Dylan Nolan, who is producing this show, and our lead investigative reporter, Andy Fancher, who has been kicking ass and taking names this past month, folks. It's been a crazy, wild week of big news here at FITSNews. As you can see on the header of this, we're talking about two major federal cases that we're going to provide some significant updates on. Also joining us later will be Erin Parrott, our newest addition. We're going to talk about a case that's close to her as a former graduate of the University of South Carolina. But we're going to start with a case that has really driven the political dynamic here in South Carolina for the better part of the last year, ever since FITSNews exclusively reported on it back in August of 2024. And I'm referring, of course, to the sad, sordid, salacious saga of former state representative R.J. May. Now, this is a story that, again, we first reported on in August of 2024 when agents of the Homeland Security Investigations Team, joined by state law enforcement division agents, executed a search warrant on May's property in West Columbia, South Carolina. Over the next few weeks, it became pretty clear what the focus of that investigation was. And then in June of this year, it became graphically and, in fact, I would say nauseatingly clear what the focus of that investigation was. And sadly, as we all know now, it revolved around child sex abuse materials of the worst possible sort. Not that there's any good kind of that, but this was especially evil. I mean, I don't know any other word for it, but this team here has been covering this issue from the beginning. And Andy, I really want to start with you because you were there the moment R.J. May was arrested. You watched him being led away in handcuffs. You were in court as some of the huge developments took place over the past few weeks. Andy, walk us through where are we with this case and what were the big developments this past month in the R.J. May saga?
Absolutely. So starting with the latest news first, R.J. May, the former chairman of vice chairman of the South Carolina Freedom Caucus, a former GOP firebrand that represented Lexington County or District 88 for several years.
My home district.
Your home district. Let's go. He pled guilty to 5 counts of distributing child sex abuse material, or CSAM, also known or referred to in court as child pornography. These pleas specifically allege that RJ sent a total of 5 videos, which I think we tallied up to approximately 5.5 minutes of the worst possible material someone could ever disseminate, better yet plead guilty to sending. I was in court when the long-anticipated admission dropped, where he said that in addition to being known as Robert John or RJ or RJ May, that he's also referred to as Joe Biden 69, which was the Kick username that it's no longer purported that he operated under the alias of to, according to federal authorities, send over 200 videos of the same kind. As you noted, we were there for his June 11th arrest, an arrest that was, 1 year to the day after he secured a decisive GOP primary win. In what was it, his second term in office, I believe?
Yeah, he'd been in there since 2020. So I think, third term. I think it was third term win.
Mm-hmm.
But
right. Yeah, he was subsequently denied bond. Following that, we saw him kind of attorney shop. He had a private attorney at the time of his arrest, which came 10 months after that federal search warrant was executed at his home, meaning that he attended every day of the South Carolina General Assembly for his last time in office. And after cycling through a series of attorney prospects, he ultimately elected to represent himself at the federal level on a federal trial. What we found so interesting is that he not only elected to represent himself, he filed a series of handwritten motions, not only denying any involvement in what the feds were accusing him of doing, but furthermore motioning to suppress evidence, specifically evidence that was wielded from the search warrant at his home, specifically accusing the special agent in charge of the case of perhaps misleading a magistrate to sign off on the search warrant. These motions, multiple motions, including a motion to change venue, were taken under advisement. What would it have been last week? Man, a lot has happened. A lot has happened in a very short period of time. Just last week, just last Wednesday, it was taken under advisement, with that hearing specifically related to his motions set to pick back up this coming Wednesday. But then come Friday, 48 hours later, as this former firebrand representing himself, fighting for his innocence, filing multiple motions, raised the white flag and admitted to everything. I say that. He admitted to 5 of the 10 counts he was indicted on. As we later learned this Monday, his plea hearing, he was actually offered 8 of those charges to be dropped. So 8 of those indictments dropped, meaning he would only have to have pled guilty to 2 distribution charges had he opted not to file a motion to suppress evidence. But he did. That failed. He pled guilty to 5. And this was the last that we saw of RJ, and perhaps the last we will see of RJ for quite some time.
Jen, I want to bring you in here. We're tracking, obviously, the latest developments on when this hearing is going to be for his sentencing, but on the 5 counts, there's a minimum, I believe, of 5 years per count, a maximum of 20. In most of these cases, we see federal judges sentence concurrently. In other words, they will sentence you to a certain amount of time on all of the charges, but they will let them all run at the same time. Obviously, judges have the option to do it consecutively. And as we talk about this case and the next 2 cases we're going to talk about, this will be very important background info for our audience. Walk us a little bit, Jen, through the process of what happens. How does a judge ultimately arrive at a sentence? And then what is the range of sentences we could be looking at for RJ May?
So the federal sentencing process is very structured. It's not quite as, there's not quite as much discretion as in the state courts. But what we will see is ahead of the sentencing hearing, which will be 90 days to 6 months out, the prosecution will file a pre-sentencing investigation report that's completed by the Department of Bureau of Prisons, and they will make their recommendations based on RJ's criminal history, the charges presented against him, and what he has pled to. His defense, which is him, will also submit the same thing, arguing for why he thinks there should be downward variances. So, if we're looking at somebody like RJ who has no prior criminal record, that is taken into account in the sentencing process. And after all of those reports are submitted, they will hold a sentencing hearing in federal court.
And so at that point, the judge will issue a sentence. And as we've seen, these can be within the guidelines. Judges can, again, have discretion to sentence within the statutory guidelines. But certainly if a inmate wants to come back on the back end and say, hey, I was treated unfairly, if a judge goes outside of the guidelines, I believe that helps them make a stronger case. But we're looking at a minimum, obviously, of 5 years if they were to run all of these concurrently, and a maximum of potentially 100 years if they were to say you're going all 20 years on each of these charges and we're going to run them consecutively.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the range. I don't want to get in the prediction business, but my sense is that Memo is going to come back and recommend he be locked up at least a decade, perhaps longer. And given the high profile nature of this case, I sense that we're looking at likely decades behind bars for RJ.
And regardless of, the sentence, part of his plea agreement is he will be on the registered sex offender list for the rest of his life after he is released from prison.
And Andy, talk to us a little bit. You were in court. They were questioning him about assets, and he's got to take a polygraph regarding assets. Is that boilerplate language, or did they think this guy's hiding some assets? Last time we checked, the only thing he had to his name was this truck. Andy, you know anything about that? We may have Andy frozen, a frozen Andy.
Andy has frozen.
Frozen in a pensive look.
It's the only way you can stop that man. Seriously, technical difficulties. It's the only way you can stop that man. He has just been a machine on these stories. I think we got Andy back. Andy,
He's back.
walk us through. We were talking about the feds wanting to polygraph R.J. May and the question of whether or not there were assets potentially hidden. You hearing anything on that, or is this just standard boilerplate for the feds?
Yeah, sure. I first of all don't know what happened, but glad to be back, fellas. Yes. So as we had previously reported, based off of some Freedom of Information Act request responses from the Edgefield County Detention Center, where RJ has been held a majority of his time, both for pretrial and where he appears to, where he will appear to stay for the foreseeable future until his sentencing. We discovered that his wife, and indirectly just helping sort and finance and file, had discovered some accounts, albeit not with a lot of money. But if I recall off the top of my head, there was one account labeled South Carolina Freedom Caucus, which had several $1,000s. There was an additional political account in his name that had several $1,000s. I can't recall if we're talking, 4,000 or 7,000. And it's not like we're talking a great deal of money here, but it's nonetheless something that has been speculated. The only definitive insight we have into that is what we did receive from the Edgefield County Detention Center, specifically messages from RJ's Chirp tablet, both to, Freedom Caucus member Ryan McCabe, as well as his sister primarily.
But we don't think this is a situation like the feds with Alec Murdaugh, where they think this guy's got millions of dollars parked offshore somewhere secretly. We don't think this is one of those type situations, do we?
I can't speak for the feds. What we have learned about RJ is that he certainly lived I wouldn't say, well, perhaps double life is correct. When you're claiming to be one thing and then disseminating hundreds of videos suggesting another. Although, again, he only pled guilty to 5. His guilty plea is associated with an account that sent CSAM material out just over a 5-day period that the feds know about, over 440 times. I don't know what RJ was involved in his extracurricular activities. There's an additional alias that the feds appear to have uncovered regarding an Eric Rentling, which RJ as well in court admitted to also operating under that alias. He didn't admit what the feds are accusing him of doing under that alias, which is flying to Colombia on multiple occasions to engage in sexual acts with prostitutes, purportedly on a GoPro camera. The feds did note that at one point in time on that GoPro camera, which perhaps was mounted to his head, he looked over at the mirror, confirming beyond a reasonable doubt that must be RJ in the video. But that was not intended to come up in trial, and it does not appear as though it is germane at all to his ultimate plea agreement. But nonetheless, an interesting anecdote, don't you think?
Well, the feds put a lot of effort into trying to find out whether some of those international trips for prostitution involved minors, because I think that was something that, obviously, based on the evidence in the CSAM charges, something to be focused on. Ultimately, no charges associated with that alleged conduct were filed,
or that alias, for that matter.
That's right. That's right. I want to bring Dylan in here. Dylan Nolan, we have been tracking for the last few years a pitched battle within the South Carolina Republican establishment, not necessarily the party, but certainly within its representatives in the South Carolina legislature, which, for those of you unfamiliar with South Carolina, that is where the power lies in the Palmetto State. We are a state where the legislative branch of government reigns supreme over the executive, certainly over the judicial branch, which we'll get to later in this show, by the way. But Dylan, we've been following the political fallout from the RJ May saga, and I wanted to bring you in here a little bit to speak to it. RJ May's band of fiscal conservatives they were already under withering, well-funded political attack by the sort of establishment Republican wing of the party before all this happened. Multi-million-dollar campaign trying to oust them from office, including trying to oust RJ May from office. That campaign did not succeed. In fact, the Freedom Caucus, the group which RJ May was aligned with, actually picked up some seats despite that massive, well-funded campaign. But in the aftermath of his fall from grace, is it safe to say, Dylan, the tables have turned, and now all of a sudden the Freedom Caucus is very much on the defensive, and it's because of RJ May in this case?
Yes, I mean, I would say that the underlying political dynamic which gives the Freedom Caucus leverage is that the GOP supermajority in this state is farther to the left on many issues than the GOP primary voting electorate. So that has not changed 1 ounce. However, having the guy who was the face of this brand, I'd say RJ May and Adam Morgan were the two people who were the loudest, the most in front of the cameras. So they were the faces of this. And to have 50% of that get associated with the most heinous crime which a human being can commit politically, that's a nightmare. So while this dynamic that gave them power certainly still exists, and I believe that whether it's the Freedom Caucus or some group that comes after, if the Freedom Caucus does not end up remaining a viable political entity here, that's not going to go away. However, we have seen the South Carolina Freedom Caucus struggle immensely over the last couple of months, both with the messaging, but also RJ May was the general behind the scenes who was running their races. He was the one who was sending out the mailers, who was producing the advertisements. This is difficult work. It's not something that just anybody can do. And most of the other people who know how to do it and know how to do it well hate the South Carolina Freedom Caucus. So not only do they have a massive gap in their public-facing side, but they also have a massive gap in the back of house, which is really what keeps you coming into office. So I know that South Carolina Freedom Caucus chairman, now Jordan Pace, has been doing what he can to try to keep things together in the legislative side, but also I believe on the campaign side. I'm not sure exactly what his role looks like there, but they are a political group who is certainly going through a difficult time. However, I don't believe that people running to the right of the GOP mainstream in this state is going to go anywhere, and it only time will tell whether it will be the Freedom Caucus that is that vehicle.
No, and that's a great observation, talking about how they basically, those who have been on the opposite side of the Freedom Caucus, basically the group's most potent weapon has now been turned, as you mentioned, into its most glaring liability. And I think you're absolutely right. We have not seen the end of the fallout from this, and the Freedom Caucus label that extends into the governor's race too. Ralph Norman, running for governor of South Carolina, is a staunch supporter of the Freedom Caucus, a member of the group at the national level. Founding member, absolutely. And so we will wait and see how that plays out in the governor's race. But before we're gonna get into some politics at the end of this show here, but I wanted to shift gears now into a second case. And I got to be honest, Jen, you were with me in the office the morning that this broke, and I remember hearing you from down the hall as you read the filings related to this second case that we're going to talk about, Jen. And just the only way I know to put it is if you thought the RJ May story was bad, if you thought the allegations and graphic descriptions in that filing were bad, the case of suspended Charleston County Judge Skip Gosnell, far worse, Jen, far worse. Not only are we talking about similar material that was referenced in the RJ May story, but in the case of Judge Gosnell, the allegations go much, much deeper. Allegations of actual assault. We're not going to get into the details because they are just too. You can't even. It's hard to think them, let alone talk about them. And in the office when this was breaking, I remember just the horror in your voice just reading this filing. But
there's not much that phases me anymore, and that made me physically ill. I mean, it's horrible.
Infants, it just, but we broke this story. We broke the news of Judge Gosnell's arrest by, again, agents of HSI, the Homeland Security Investigation Unit. And then very shortly thereafter, federal prosecutors submitted a motion for his detention, which really laid bare the allegations. And Dylan, you were actually helped us cover this case too. Two of you guys take it away. Let's walk our audience through the basis of these allegations against Judge Gosnell. Dylan, you want to go first with some of the details?
I'd love to. So we received word that there was a federal law enforcement presence at Judge Gosnell's home. We heard this from multiple sources. We've got little birdies everywhere. This is how we also got RJ May. We got great sources, but we heard that they were at his residence. And what we later learned was that this was the result of a National Center for Missing and Exploited Children cyber tip. This is how web providers let the government know that they believe somebody is doing something related to the production or dissemination of child sex abuse materials on their platform. When the federal government receives such a tip, or state agencies, they will then go obtain a warrant. They will surveil you electronically and even physically to make sure that the IP address and the web, your router basically is the router that they think is at your house. Once they've confirmed that, they go and knock on the door. And that's when we became aware of the situation, because they knocked on the door early in the morning. Obviously, this is a situation where when a bunch of law enforcement vehicles show up on somebody's block and everybody knows who they are, it doesn't take long for people to start talking. Once those documents were filed, we learned that Judge Gosnell, upon having his door knocked on, immediately told the investigators, what you're looking for is plugged into my computer. And sure enough, there was a thumb drive which was plugged in. And the initial document, I believe, only described 3 of the hundreds of files contained therein. Of course, the rest of them will all be going through processing, where they will send them to the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, which keeps a database of all of the known files of this sort, which they can then compare to, because they will know this is XYZ person. This was taken on XYZ date. They were XYZ years old. All of this is necessary so that they can then go to court and prove that you were in possession of this kind of material. So these people, these victims, there's like a roster of them, which will be called to go testify in cases around the country to put these people behind bars. And God bless them for doing that. Fancher?
If I could jump in here too, speaking on victims, that was an important note that I did not mention regarding RJ, because just this week, speaking on NCMEC specifically, they, of course, worked alongside federal authorities, and they helped identify upwards of, I think, 64 victims altogether in the content that RJ distributed from Kick. They have since identified over 20 of them. Over 20, is my understanding, have been contacted, and perhaps they too will appear for sentencing. Just wanted to add that.
Yes, so this is what they're doubtlessly doing on Judge Gosnell's cases. They will send the files over to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Some poor souls over there who review this stuff day in and day out will go and compare it to what they have, and they will then send the government back. These are the people we were able to identify. And by the way, when we were, people were so mad for months on RJ, why is this taking so long? When you consider that this has to go back and forth and go through this, process, which is an arduous process, this is why it takes so long. They're not sitting on their thumbs. They got to make sure they get it right. They can't just go, oh, this looks like it's a minor. That's a minor.
And I think specifically with these CSAM cases, they are indicting early to get these people off of the streets, get them away from these kids. So I think
they have more than enough probable cause in this case to keep him in pretrial detention.
So I do think you see a longer process in terms of the court process. It takes longer because they are investigating while they are going through the court process.
Although I have to say, these federal cases, this stuff gets turned around 5 times faster than any state level case. You have people in South Carolina getting tried for murders that they committed when I was starting high school. Right now, I am about to get married and buy a house. So, we're judging the federal criminal system, saying it's too slow. I get it. You find this stuff and you think, okay, we've got 3 of these pictures. Let's lock them up for life in a trial tomorrow. That's not how it works. We need to go and make sure that we know, okay, these are verified minors who were minors at the time where these images were taken. We can get them on a plane to show up to court and bury you. So take this plea. That's how it goes.
But that leads into the next component of this case. In addition to all that work, in the case of Judge Gosnell, unlike the case of R.J. May, at least that we know of, we're not just dealing with consumption of this.
It's not just images in this
material.
case.
We're dealing with a guy who is, according to what federal agents insist they have uncovered on his phone, we're dealing with a guy who has physically, sexually abused infants.
So if I may, I mean, what happened here is they take all your electronic devices and they start looking through his message history, and they find him talking with other people, admitting to having performed sex acts on infants and trying to line up opportunities to go and do so in the future, talking about children which were under his care that he abused. And this is what led to the federal authorities. And if anybody's listening to this who happens to have had their kids around Judge Gosnell, the federal authorities are asking that if you believe something might have happened, that you reach out to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yeah, and as this case moves forward, obviously, when the feds presented this information in their motion to deny him bond, Gosnell quickly consented and waived his right to appear in court on a question of whether or not to receive bond. So he's not going to be out anytime soon. And I got to tell you,
how many charges? What kind of time is he looking at?
Well, we don't know yet because we don't know the full breadth of the charges that are going to be brought against him. I mean, this is a very active investigation. As we mentioned, they pulled a ton of devices out of this house. My understanding was that they had literally only gone through one of those devices, or rather two, if you count the thumb drive he pointed to. But there are multiple electronic devices, SD cards, thumb drives that were in Gosnell's home that they are just beginning to go through. And that process, Dylan was mentioned earlier. But Gosnell was suspended moments after his arrest by the South Carolina Supreme Court, saying that his continued presence on the bench posed a clear and present danger to justice in South Carolina.
And I saw an interesting post by prominent attorney Bakari Sellers in the aftermath of his suspension, asking whether his cases would all be reviewed. And that inspired me to go look and see other cases where judges have been taken off the bench after committing criminal activity or being alleged to have committed criminal activity. And it seems as though that is not the standard unless it is the type of crime which involves something related to their conduct on the bench.
Yeah. And what was also just frightening about the federal motion detailing these allegations against Judge Gosnell was one of the allegations was that he was participating in chats online to help other abusers of children evade accountability. That was, to me, just the worst part of this, is that not only is this guy doing all these things, he's trying to help other people do the same horrific things to kids. So, I mean, it's just we
and
thought
if I
RJ
may, yeah, I mean, if we thought R.J. May was bad, but if I may too, and this kind of springboards to a column you posted this week, Will, does any amount of time, including the maximum, whether it be for R.J., Gosnell, or any additional monster, justify the punishment? I mean, justify the crime, justify the act?
Well, yeah, we did I wrote a column this week on the death penalty in South Carolina, which was suspended for a period of, I believe, 12 years. Was brought back last fall. There have been 5 executions since then. My argument was that in cases like this, slow hanging. String these people up. Do it in public. Let people watch it. And certainly that is a position that others have advanced. And then in the aftermath of this case, we've seen David Pascoe, solicitor here in South Carolina, who's running for Attorney General. He's been very aggressive on this issue. But yeah, and Dylan and I talked about this on our month in review. And I thought, Dylan, you had some insightful comments about how, yeah, we can go to the mat on punishments, but how do we really address this flaw in the human condition? And Dylan, I think you and I didn't really have a good answer for that.
I don't know that there's an answer on this earth for this level of depravity, but I do know that if Judge Gosnell ever walks the streets a free man, should these allegations be proven in court, our justice system is a joke. At his age, he definitely should not ever walk the streets a free man again if convicted or if he pleads.
Yeah. Well, I want to switch gears now as we continue to move through the just incredible month of headlines on so many cases that we've covered. Again, most of them focusing on major developments in federal cases. But I want to bring Andy in front and center on this one, the case of Sheriff Chuck Wright. And Andy, I just got to say, the work you've done on this case with Jen Wood, he's got the coffee cup there, I love it, with Jen Wood in a key support role on research, but you guys have just done amazing work on this Chuck Wright story, and I believe that it is your reporting, the pressure that you consistently brought to bear, and I know, Andy, you're going to tell us this, the incredible network of sources. Dylan was referencing them earlier. But Andy, give us the latest on the saga of Chuck Wright.
Of former, now federally charged Sheriff Chuck Wright. If I had an opioid pill for every report that I've done on Chuck Wright, I'd still be about 120 oxycodons short of what the FBI alleged this man popped in 4 months' time. We are, of course, talking about the former 5-term sheriff, first elected in 2004 to lead one of the largest counties and subsequently one of the largest sheriff departments in South Carolina. He pled guilty along with 2 co-defendants on September 19th to 3 federal counts, specifically conspiracy to commit theft concerning programs receiving federal funds, a wire fraud conspiracy, and obtaining controlled substance by misrepresentation. Now, if I were to pop a hopium pill myself, Chucky here is looking at a maximum fine of $750,000 for all of these charges, a maximum of 29 years in prison, and up to 11 years supervised release. That's not related to the minimum forfeiture amount of $440,000. And we thought that his spending of $53,000 on his county credit card over a multi-year period was bad. After former Sheriff Chuck Wright pled guilty, Interstage Wright, one of his co-defendants in this federal case, Lawson Barry Watson. I've been spending a great deal of time learning as much as I possibly can about Mr. Watson. And in fact, I just got back from a meeting yesterday in the upstate indicating that Watson and his merry band of cohorts have been running a small town called Reedville, which is in Spartanburg County, for years. I mean, when I have officially we're not only off the reservation, but there is no more frame of reference. I mean, we're beyond No Country for Old Men. We're beyond Breaking Bad. We're beyond the Ozarks. I mean, when you're talking moonshiners, when you're talking machine guns potentially being moved across county lines or disappearing altogether, when you're talking an illegal network of gamblers that appear to have flourished under Chuck Wright's leadership, when you're talking dope peddlers sitting side by side with high brass members of his department, it's almost hard, if not impossible, to argue that the sheriff was not only aware, but that he was complicit. Now, of course, the federal charges do not go into any of that. The federal charges allege that Chuck, here's a more updated and accurate picture of Chucky here. So the federal charges allege that Chuck employed this man feloniously for about 2 decades. This was, of course, the department's code enforcement officer, who has little to no documented output as a code enforcement officer, although he had access to an armada of taxpayer-subsidized gear and equipment that he appears to have subsequently used to abuse Reedville, although, again, federal charges did not go into that. Barry Watson pled guilty on September 23rd to 1 count of wire fraud conspiracy. He faces a maximum fine of $250 and up to 20 years in prison. After Lawson Barry L.B. Watson pled guilty, we have, if I've got the photo ready, actually, I think it's still in the printer, so we will not have a visual on the former Sheriff's Office chaplain Amos Durham, who pled guilty on September 25th to essentially enabling Chuck Wright to abuse a Sheriff's Office chaplain benevolence fund to the tune of $28,000 to $30,000 to fund and fuel not only Chuck's private life, including his pill dependency, but Watson's private life. As I believe we exclusively reported, and I don't even believe the feds mentioned this, Watson appears to have used, Amos Durham, Chaplain Amos Durham, appears to have used that chaplain's benevolence fund to perhaps install a new AC unit at his house, buy new prescription glasses for his honor guard uniform, as well as just frivolous spending sprees at a number of clothing warehouses across Spartanburg. So these are the defendants. These are the cohorts. And they've got a tumultuous legal road ahead of them. But no one, I think, will have it harder than Chuck Wright, photographed here with one of his attorneys at the federal level, former solicitor, former Congressman Trey Gowdy. As one source said yesterday, they said the feds could have dug to hell and back and they still wouldn't have uncovered everything that there is to speak on Chuck Wright and his band of cohorts. And I absolutely agree with that statement. And yes, to your point, yes, there are active investigations into Chuck.
Andy, if I may stop you, I would like to point out the real importance of the state level authorities pursuing charges here, because President Donald Trump has a history of pardoning Republican sheriffs who are guilty as hell because they are Republican sheriffs. And it would not surprise me, especially after Joe Biden's machine gun of pardons at the end of his administration, that Donald Trump says, you know, screw it and follow suit and machine guns a bunch of pardons. And I think that Chuck Wright, as much as I disagree with this, is likely to be one of those individuals. I think it'd be a miscarriage of justice. I think it'd be completely unfair to the people of South Carolina to do that. But I could see that being what happens at the end of the road. And normally when you look at the states and the feds coming after somebody for the same thing, I kind of think this is duplicative. This is a waste of taxpayer money. Well, there's a very real chance here that these federal pleas end up not meaning anything. So obviously
it's not
we don't
out
want
of
to
the
jump
realm.
down Solicitor Black's throat, but this is important.
Well, if he gets pardoned by Trump, it ain't going to be from Trey Gowdy. If he gets pardoned,
you don't think so?
Oh no. Gowdy was a never Trumper back when Trump first ran. So if Chuck's relying on Trey Gowdy to get him a pardon from the administration, that ain't going to happen. Andy, though, you were getting ready to detail this ethics investigation, because that's another fascinating development. You reported on this. Walk us through
perhaps
that.
An equally as exciting revelations, this ethics probe. All right, so now we have the third investigation into Chuck Wright at the civil level, because the South Carolina State Ethics Commission, back in, what was it, July of last year, it's already been that long, they had received a complaint regarding Chuck deputizing his blood child, Jared Andy Wright, which is a flagrant, direct violation of state nepotism laws, state ethics laws. So that was the first time that we saw the Ethics Commission on the scene. They were furthermore provided complaints, which were evidently founded, regarding Chuck's perhaps criminal spending of his county credit card. As the Post and Courier reported, those charges exceeded $50,000. The Ethics Commission ultimately found probable cause on $17,000 related to his spending on the county credit card. And what we're looking at altogether from the ethics probe is 65 charges. All right. So 65 different violations of multiple state ethic laws, including but not limited to nepotism and, financial gain. These ethics charges are idiocracy manifest, literally. We're talking $800 trips to Fuddruckers, of course, across an extended period of time. Why not? Extended trips to extensive spending at Fuddruckers, at McDonald's, at Burger King,
Yeah,
at
great
Krispy
fries at
Kreme.
Fuddruckers, though. Great French fries.
Krispy Kreme. A cop getting charged with an ethics law for
donuts.
perhaps feloniously buying donuts from Krispy Kreme. We're talking thousands of dollars spent at car washes to clean his county vehicles that were paid for perhaps with opioid recovery money. We're talking vehicles included but not limited to a short-lived Tahoe and a Gamecock Maroon King Ranch that became a character in and of itself in the final months of Chuck's time in office. It's almost hard to believe that
Andy,
Chuck even had any time. Huh?
Tell them about Candy Crush.
We're getting there. We're getting there. Because it's almost hard to believe that the sheriff even had any time with the thousands that he was charging to the Apple.com app store, potentially for his crippling Candy Crush addiction that multiple deputies have attested to, on top of sitting in an idling King Ranch listening to a several hundred, actually over $1,000 Sirius XM subscription. Remember, all that we are subsidizing all of this, y'all. This all has come out of our pocket for beloved Sheriff Chuck Wright. And it's almost hard to believe that he even found time to sit down at restaurants such as Outback Steakhouse and Longhorn Steakhouse. And
well, I mean, you can play Candy Crush at Fuddruckers. Come on now.
I could absolutely play Candy Crush at Fuddruckers, but I would hope that Will would get a little pissed off if that's all I'm doing. You look at the Ethics Commission's findings into Chuck Wright's spending, and it's almost no surprise that the per capita violent crime rate in Spartanburg right now is greater than Chicago. When this is what we're doing, which is washing our county vehicles, not just any, I'm not talking squad car, I'm talking his personal county vehicles, which he had a fleet of during his time in office.
All right, folks, apologize for some technical difficulties there, but Andy Fincher, keep going on the Chuck Wright saga and the ethics report you were updating us on.
Sure. So, I mean, I was just detailing further just some of the absolutely excessive and unjustified spending regarding this man. So we can compound the spending, again, to an assortment of restaurants that no taxpayer should ever have to subsidize, with an alleged pill dependency. That's just what makes this so awfully rich. As again, I noted in the beginning of this segment, the feds are aware of Chuck popping at least 147 pills over a 4-month period in 2023. As our independent reporting has uncovered, as early as 2015, a Roxycodone bottle purportedly fell out of his golf bag. And then if we fast forward to 2024, we have the son of one of Chuck Wright's parishioners watching Chuck Wright purportedly enter the crime scene of his mother and pop 420 milligram oxycodone tablets at the crime scene. This is our constitutional sheriff. The days of pleading ignorance. Well, to some people, he still is. Because if you go to my Facebook, you can see people are still referring to him as the active sheriff, openly admitting that they would still vote for this. And why? Because he went to church and because he wore a Jerusalem cross necklace around his neck. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been lied to by a hypocrite. I don't know how much more evidence you need. Is it 3 federal charges? Is it 4 pending state charges? Is it 65 ethics charges? What more do you want?
Well, he might be missing a couple of church services in the near future.
And not only that, folks, I just want, for those of you who have been following this story, I can confidently tell you that based on some conversations with Jen and Andy about the work that they've been doing on some follow-ups, you ain't seen nothing yet. There is more coming on this guy as we sift through the detritus of the of this
one thing that really disturbs me about this story is that it took the feds getting involved for anything to go down with Chuck. I mean, this is stuff you talk about, just reams and reams and reams of criminal activity that anybody with half a brain could have detected a long time ago. What does it say about our state law enforcement cohort that this behavior was not interdicted by state authorities some time ago?
Right. And when you start looking at the connections in Chuck Wright's Rolodex, including but not limited to his own attorney at the federal level, Trey Gowdy, And if we not only look at the attorney representing him at the state level for his ethics charges, Stephen Denton, a former captain of his own sheriff's department, who is now a criminal defense attorney. How do you go from putting criminals in jail to representing them? How interesting.
Yeah. Andy,
if
I
you
gotta tell you,
look,
I gotta give you a long leash, man. But if you're gonna impugn Beaker from the Muppets, man, by comparing him to Trey Gowdy, I can't let that stand, man. How dare you assault Beaker?
I mean, I don't have a problem with criminal defense attorneys, representing criminals, and I don't have a problem with people that used to want to work in law enforcement wanting to work on the other side. But I do have a problem with somebody who is seemingly very blatantly committing criminal activity, not being charged by law enforcement, the people whose jobs it is to do that.
and if you look at who has stuck their neck out for Chuck Wright in this dire time, let's look at who provided a comment to the media as a federal grand jury was being impaneled to hear evidence against Chuck Wright. That is, of course, Governor Henry McMaster, who told inquiring minds that he always knew Chuck Wright to be a good sheriff. And then when we started peeling back the veil on that front, we found out that Henry McMaster, back when he was an attorney general, essentially let one of Chuck's subordinates walk after admitting to viewing and saving child pornography. There is so much more to uncover. Like I have noted, even with our exclusive reporting on just the troves and troves of felonious acts in Spartanburg County, it feels as though we have hardly taken a chip off the iceberg here. It's a lot. It's scary, as a matter of fact. Seeing how some folks in this entwined vortex, wind up committing suicide with 2 bullets in the back of their head. Again, I encourage folks to reach out to me directly, because it's not going to take a village. No, sir. Yeah. It's not going to take a village. It's going to take a county. It took a county to get us this far, and we've hardly made a mile on this road. So we need more folks to reach out. Anybody and everybody. No judgment here. Andy at FITSNews.com.
Well, and speaking of system failure, again, because I think that's what we're looking at here in this case and in so many of the cases that we covered, just the abject failure of the law enforcement, prosecutorial, judicial apparatus at every level. But we are now going to get into arguably the case that put South Carolina's system failure on the national map. Because I got to say this crew here that you're watching, we've been on this for years. We've been banging the drum for years. Fix this broken system. Hold these violent criminals accountable. Stop re-victimizing victims and endangering the public by putting career criminals back on the street over and over again. And we've been screaming this.
When I started working for you in 2021, you had already been banging this drum for a decade. And I feel like when I started working for you at the end of 2021, you were still mostly alone. You had a couple of allies. But we are now in a position where, with the case of the murder of Logan Federico, a beautiful young woman who had a promising future of being a teacher, contributing to society, she was killed by a career criminal who had already faced multiple felony charges, who frankly had no position being on the street at the time of her killing, and killed over absolutely nothing. This has brought this case to the point where the richest man in the world, who owns arguably the most influential thought dissemination platform, X, and Elon Musk, is talking about the broken judicial system in South Carolina.
Absolutely. And Jen, let's bring you in here, because you were one of the first people to tell this story. And I remember you were interviewing Steve Federico, the father of Logan Federico, whose testimony this week before a U.S. House Judiciary Committee, subcommittee rather, in Charlotte, North Carolina, really blew this story up. But I remember not just that impassioned testimony, which we're going to get to, but I remember walking in our lobby when you were meeting with him for the first time before your interview, and just, you could feel it, that nothing is going to stop this man. Nothing is going to stop this man. And Jen, walk us through your history with Steve and set us up for this clip we're going to watch.
Right. So Logan Federico was murdered in Colombia May 3rd of this year. She's a 22-year-old college student. She was in Colombia visiting friends. It was a horrible, brutal murder. She was forced on her knees by somebody who broke into the house and shot with a shotgun. She laid there for 7 hours before anybody discovered her. Um, it's it's as a mother of a college student, it's one of those things that it's your worst nightmare. And I remember right after the murder, they arrested Columbia Police and Lexington County Sheriff's Office arrested Alexander Dickey, a 33-year-old career criminal, fairly quickly, and they had a press conference. And I remember watching the press conference and seeing Logan's father, Steve, get up and speak. Um, and I knew at that point he was a force of nature. I mean, I just absolutely, it was heartbreaking. One of the rare times where I cried was watching that press conference. So I connected with him in June, and he was very happy to come in and do an interview to talk about his daughter's case and what had happened. And we were talking about a criminal who has been arrested and charged 40 times. I mean, we're 33 years old, 40 times, 25 of these are felonies. He has spent just over 400 days in a prison or detention center. And
600, I think. But
yeah. So, I had him
still not enough.
Right, not enough.
I mean, do the math. We're talking more than a dozen felonies, and you've spent less than 3 years in jail. More than two dozen felonies. What is happening?
Well, in this case, there were a lot of things that happened, but the biggest problem is his arrest did not make it to his rap sheet, and that not all of his arrests did. So when somebody is booked in a detention center, if there are outstanding warrants, police often use that opportunity to serve you with those warrants. But every time you are served with a warrant to get those charges added to your rap sheet, you have to fingerprint them for each warrant that is served. And that did not happen with Alexander Dickey. So these did not make it to his rap sheet, which is also in South Carolina known as a sled catch report. So when they went to charge him, they charged him with like burglary, first offense, instead of a heavier charge, and they would make plea deals because these charges were not on his sheet. It's just an absolutely frustrating and scary gap in our system. And
Jennifer, you've spoken with some of the law enforcement officials who are frustrated with this system not working. What is it specifically that they propose to make this work?
We've got to have some checks and balances, and we're relying on fingerprints. I mean, when he was first arrested, I put his name into our court system search, and it pulled all of these charges up. It's not like they were hidden.
So this is a flimsy excuse at best that the
Right.
trial judge could not go on their computer and look into the judicial index, or heck, even Google this guy had committed so many crimes that it would pop on Google.
Yeah.
And they're saying that, okay, it was not in the catch report, which I understand. The catch reports must be accurate. We need to get to a point where we have accurate rap sheets for everybody. But
Correct.
still, Mr. Federico is not willing to accept that. And I'm certainly not willing to accept that they had done their obligation to the public to keep us safe by doing even basic due diligence into the person who is before them. Both as prosecutors, the prosecutors should have done their due diligence and figured out that this guy had faced other charges and not just relied on this, because the reality is this is a known problem within the law enforcement community. So if you guys know that this is a problem, you need to have ways to work around it until we can solve it.
Right. 100%. So that was a lot of my first conversation with Steve, and he came back in September, and we did another interview because he wants his daughter's murderer to be tried and for the death penalty executed.
Yeah.
And as a father, I understand that. And he has had, when we spoke, he had no conversation since May with the solicitor's office about the status of the case or whether or not they would be pursuing the death penalty. So he was very, very frustrated. And I think that is a huge part of what led to the testimony he gave in front of the House Judiciary Committee in Charlotte this week on victims of violent crimes, which I'm going to go ahead and share.
How many of y'all have kids? I'm just curious. Here's what I need you to do. When I tell you this story, think about your kids. Think about your child coming home from a night out with their friends, laying down, going to sleep, feeling somebody come in the room and wake them and drag her out of bed, naked, forced on her knees, with her hands over her head, begging for her life, begging for her hero, her father, me, that couldn't be there. She was 5'3". She weighed 115 pounds. Bang! Dead. Gone. Why? Because Alexander Levante Dickey, who was arrested 39 goddamn times, 25 felonies, was on the street. How about that? How good are we doing for our family? How good are you doing for your kids? He should have been in jail for over 140 years for all the crimes he committed. You know how much time he spent in prison? A little over 600 days in 10 years. He's only 30 years old. He was committing 2.65 crimes a year since he was 15 years old, but nobody could figure out that he couldn't be rehabilitated. Well, you'd have to put him in prison to see if he could be rehabilitated.
And I thank him for having the courage to go and speak about. I mean, this is incredibly painful, and I cannot imagine if I was in his position being able to be a force of nature like that, because at this point, he can't do anything for his own daughter, but he might be able to do something for somebody else's kid in the future.
Well, let's talk about how this is. I mean, this committee hearing has really flipped the debate on this, because we have seen in the aftermath of Steve Federico's raw appeal to those members of the U.S. Congress, we have seen major developments in South Carolina in his case. The Attorney General of South Carolina, Alan Wilson, has basically told the Fifth Circuit solicitor who has jurisdiction over this case, get it right or I'm taking it from you. Essentially, he has put his top death penalty lawyer, embedded that attorney, Melody Brown, I believe her name is, in the Fifth Circuit office. So this has become a significant prosecutorial matter in South Carolina. And we are also hearing reports, we can exclusively report on this now, we're hearing reports that there will be potential impeachment proceedings against the prosecutor in the Fifth Circuit. Now, we're not sure whether those tie exclusively to this case or not, or whether it's a prior case, because, folks, I hate to say this, as horrific as this story is, we've covered a ton of these in South Carolina. This happens all the time in our state. And Aaron, you're joining us now. Aaron, I don't know if you remember when you got to Carolina. I think it would have been a little before your freshman year, but the story of Samantha Lee Jacobson, stabbed to death by a fake Uber driver. Again, it's another one of these stories. Just
priors out the wazoo.
Yeah, where's the accountability? Where's the death penalty in that case? Didn't seek it. But Aaron, talk to us a little your perspective. You lived in this town. I mean, this was right a few blocks away from the University of South Carolina. I mean, do you feel like you're talking to your friends? I mean, does this feel like a safe environment?
You would think, considering how close it is to the campus, but with all 4 years I was a student there, even before, I was always told by my mom to never walk like anywhere near there alone. I never went anywhere by myself. I didn't feel safe doing that, hearing everything. And honestly, whenever my friends and I would go to 5 Points, we would always stay in minimum groups of 2, But even then, we always wanted to stay in groups of 3. And all of my friends we all shared our locations with each other because nobody really felt safe going anywhere by themselves in that area.
Well, we were talking earlier about the case of Samantha Lee Josephson, the 2019 case, and obviously this case. Let me ask you this question, Aaron, because we talked about it a lot this week. I wrote an editorial about it, but I want to get your thoughts on it. Do you believe cases like this, where these cold-blooded, premeditated killings are proven beyond a reasonable doubt, do you believe these career criminals who have been let out over and over again, do you believe they deserve death when they commit crimes like this, Aaron?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think,
Yeah.
honestly, I mean, with being in Columbia and being a student there, honestly, if something were to happen to me, if that were me, I think my family would probably be in jail for killing the person that killed me, honestly.
Yeah, they wouldn't wait, would they?
Not at all. It would be a fight between my parents of who got to him first.
Yeah. Well, and Jen, you've talked to Steve some this week about how this turned very political, and certainly people jumping on board this from a political standpoint months after the fact, we'd like to point out. That hasn't sat well with him, has it?
I think it's been hard for him because his goal has always been, justice for Logan, and hearing Logan's story and making sure what happened to her doesn't happen again. And I think this blew up pretty quickly. I mean, I think his testimony in front of Congress was powerful, and I wasn't surprised by it. But he has had calls from politicians all over the country, and I think it's been hard. It's been hard seeing people lob this back and forth as arguments as to why they're the better candidate for a particular race, when all he wants is for his daughter to receive the justice that she deserves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and as Dylan mentioned it at the outset of this segment, and as we've been talking about, it is a drum we've been beating for a long time. And I got to be honest, watching this story blow up the way it has, immensely painful for Steve Federico to go through it and have to kind of relive all that. But thank God he stood up and did what he did and said what he said and said it the way he said it, because, a lot of victims, family members, they'll push. This guy's righteously pissed, and he's not stopping.
This just happened 5 months ago today. 5 months ago. So this is so raw and so fresh, and for him to be out there doing this, it's just so impressive.
Absolutely. Well, folks, we're drawn to the end of the show here, but I cannot thank this news team enough for the incredible work that they have done on all of these stories. Dylan, Andy, Jen, Aaron, working with you guys again on these stories. They're difficult. Some of these stories we've talked about today, whether it's these child sex abuse cases or these horrific murders, they are difficult to cover, but they are absolutely vital to cover, because, again, if we don't beat this drum the way that we have for so many years, no one's going to come around. And the mainstream press on these stories, far too often, they are more interested in maintaining access to the office of these solicitors and these corrupt sheriffs. Andy, you know what I'm talking about. You feel what I'm talking about.
I second.
They would rather maintain their relationships with these people who are failing in their duty than to actually call them out for those failures. And I am proud to work with a news team that doesn't give a damn about that. We're going to call them out no matter what. But for everybody watching, if that's the kind of accountability that you want to support from your media outlet, please consider supporting us here at FITSNews, because it is your support that empowers all that we do here as a voice, again, for accountability, for victims like the family of Logan Federico, and for the interests of a better, safer South Carolina. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in this week. Thanks to this wonderful news team, and we will catch you next time on the Month in Review.